Bashir Ahmed has just one memory about moving into his family's new Columbus apartment 16 years ago: the sounds of police sirens and gunfire. A new American arrival, then 8-year-old Bashir wondered if his new home was any safer than the refugee camp in Kenya where his family lived after fleeing the civil war and instability of their homeland of Somalia. At that young age, I was starting to have those questions like, can I even go outside and be okay? Said Bashir, who is now 24. He's not alone. An estimated 60,000 Somali Americans call Columbus home. Many fled war, violence, and a humanitarian crisis only to find danger in America, experts said. After witnessing much of the same kind of violence in his Franklinton neighborhood as a child, including a homicide scene, Bashir realized he may not have actually escaped the dangers he and his family had fled. For another Somali immigrant, Yusuf Ahmed, who goes by KY, it took 4 years in prison to realize how where he grew up on Columbus West and North Sides influenced his criminal activity, including theft and drug trafficking. It was to the point where I didn't even know how deep I was going because everyone else around me was doing it too, KY said. This wasn't something my parents were expecting. They came here for the opportunity, and this is the last thing that pops into their mind. Columbus has the second largest Somali immigrant population behind Minneapolis. And Somalis are the largest immigrant population in Columbus, followed by Bhutanese Nepalis, who are estimated at 27,000. Somali refugees come here unfamiliar with American gang and gun culture, coupled with cultural and language barriers, said Fatuma Buell, founder of the Somali Bantu Diverse Center, an organization that helps the Somali Bantu community, a Somali ethnic group, with resettlement. Somali parents are always shocked about seeing their kid with a gun, because they have only heard America to be secure, Buell said. The youth. They are the only future for these parents who have left their country. But we need to know how to help them stay away from what's happening on the streets. Ohio ranks among the top 20 states for the most at-risk youth, and Black and brown communities are disproportionately vulnerable, especially to youth gun violence, according to research by the Center for American Progress, a liberal think tank. 2 years ago, Columbus Mayor Andrew Ginther declared gun violence a public health crisis in the city. Yet, immigrant communities living in affordable housing units, like the large Somali population in Wedgwood Village on the west side and Franklinton's South Park apartments, face different challenges that are often statistically lost in broad racial categorizations that group foreign-born Black youth like Somalis into the African American demographic, according to data by the Pew Research Center. Roughly 4.6 million, or 1 in 10, Black people in the U.S. were born in a different country as of 2019, up from 3% in 1980, according to Pew. Bashir said he found it easy to assimilate to the harmful stereotypes attached to African Americans since their similarities in complexion gave him something to resonate with. Unaware of the systemic racism that perpetuates in America, Bashir, and several others like him, had no clue what to beware of, he said. A previously reported dispatch analysis also found that 26% of homicides in 2024 occurred in apartment complexes. 8 of these apartment homicides were Somali Americans killed on the west side. These statistics don't surprise Bashir or KY. As the prevalence of gang and gun culture became attractive to their peers, news of friends being killed became a regular occurrence. Everybody had beef with everybody. You just hope it wasn't somebody you knew, Bashir said. Other than that, we knew people were getting killed every day. South Park apartments were subject to a public nuisance complaint in 2022 for unsanitary living conditions, other maintenance issues, and crime problems. The neighborhood experienced roughly 100 police calls between 2023 and 2024 related to shooting reports, according to Columbus police records. Wedgwood Village apartments near the Hilltop had about 600 shooting reports to police over the same period. More than 3,000 people have also signed an online petition on Change.org calling for the closure of Wedgwood Village, saying the complex is nothing but a breeding ground for crime and violence, not to mention inhumane living conditions. Both Bashir's and KY's families no longer live in this area, and they both say the neighborhood seems to have improved much from when they spent some of their childhood there. But I'm never going back, KY said. Community leaders say organizations such as MY Project USA, the Somali Bantu Diverse Center, and Community Refugee and Immigration Services recognize the problem and are reaching out to Somali youth to provide positive intervention. Young Somali American adults like Bashir and KY, who are not related despite having the same last name. Share their stories with local immigrant children to help them navigate their new environment, which often includes elevated exposure to discrimination, social isolation, and other conditions that can put young people at greater risk of gang affiliation or other violence. I didn't understand what the culture of the inner city was like. Long before he became a program director, Bantu community liaison, and soccer coach for the Hilltop Tigers Soccer Club, a free soccer program run through the Muslim nonprofit MY Project USA, Bashir was a small boy in Kenya. His family was initially resettled to Atlanta when he was 6, and they moved to Columbus 2 years later to reunite with families scattered across the country. The area that encompasses South Park Apartments was just another neighborhood in an unfamiliar country that his single mother could afford, he said. I didn't understand that there were differences between the neighborhoods I lived in and the neighborhoods on this side of town, said Bashir, who now lives on the west side. So, you don't really realize there's a lot of traps laid out for you. You can easily fall in. Alongside memories of walking 30 minutes with his mother to a nearby Aldi to buy groceries each week are the memories of hearing gunshots, police sirens, and seeing what he now calls sketchy behavior in the neighborhood, something he knows now to be gang activity. Nobody told us about the neighborhood, so we didn't get what was happening, Bashir said. So, I didn't know what gang culture was, but that was something I was introduced to early on. Unfamiliar and afraid of his environment, Bashir often found himself at the Sullivan Gardens Recreation Center, playing soccer with his friends and seeking guidance from his mentor, Mike Tiller, who worked there. For me, it was a place where you could go and just be a kid because you couldn't be kid in the neighborhood with constant gunshots, and I had to fight really hard to hold on to that, Bashir said. Even though Bashir found an outlet to keep him off the streets, he said many of his friends fell victim to the influences of ill-intentioned older men in their neighborhood who would give them money, make them run errands, and then eventually introduce them to crime, often giving them their first firearm. A lot of us didn't have dads, so these guys were like older brothers. Before you know it, you're doing all of these things because you see that the older homies are doing it, he said. For those who did get caught up in neighborhood gang activity, Bashir said it was more devastating to see young, first-generation Somali Americans settle into a life of criminal activity or drug abuse. I think it's slightly harder for our kids because they come from different cultures and they're already struggling with an identity crisis, so it's harder for them to figure themselves out, Bashir said. The reality for first-generation, at-risk youth. Historically, Black and other underserved Americans have populated urban areas and suffered heavy exposure to violence. Gun violence became the leading cause of death for American children in 2022, according to research by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, with almost half of child gun deaths to Black youth. Immigrant communities also face additional challenges with not knowing how to navigate America's resources and services available to underserved communities, or the discriminatory barriers that exist within it. Alina Hussein, who works with the youth at MY Project USA and has a background in healthcare administration and public health, said when street violence is the only example first-generation youth have of American culture, they will quickly assimilate to it. They're getting involved with gang violence because it's cool. It's an escape from your restrictive household where you're following cultural practices that sometimes don't fit in this country, Hussein said. And you see people that seem to be living fun lives and end up committing violence with them just to have a brotherhood. Bashir said he struggled with juggling multiple identities, which led to uncertainty in deciding who he should strive to become. I was caught between being a Bantu Somali, a Black man, a son and a father at the same time. So there was so much of myself I had to divide into pieces, said Bashir, who often looked after his younger siblings as a sort of father figure. It took me away from what I thought I was supposed to be. Hussein echoed this by saying first-generation Americans born to immigrant parents who work long hours and lower-wage jobs to get by don't know what they should aspire to become in America. Unfortunately, with new immigrants, sometimes their kids are still not able to pull themselves out of poverty because they don't have the financial literacy, Hussein said. In the struggle to balance multiple identities, Bashir said some first-generation Somalis also use American gang culture to confront ongoing cultural conflict in their home country. An example of this would be the Bantu Life, or BL 800 Street Gang based out of Wedgwood. The Dispatch reported 13 of its members were arrested in 2022 after an 18-month investigation. This February, Columbus Division of Police announced the arrests of 21 members of the gang. The most damaging part is they're accepting American gang culture. That's not our culture whatsoever, he said. I went from being a basketball player to a troublemaker. KY's current community knows the 25-year-old to be the author of the book 90 Days in Hell, Jail Inside of Jail, and founder of the nonprofit Empowerment Through Adversity Global, or ETA Global, which helps the formerly incarcerated find opportunities. But he said his origins began as a boy who felt surmounting pressure to fit in. With a story no different to the thousands of Somali Americans who resettled in the United States, KY said he quickly realized how the cultural expectations in his household, to keep quiet and not become a problem for his hardworking parents, clashed with American school culture to be involved in recreation and wear the latest clothes. We never even had the audacity to go and say, "I want these Nikes," to my mom because she's making sure no matter what there's food on the table and a roof over your head, KY said. As much as KY tried to ignore how different he was from other kids, he didn't wear the right shoes or speak like everyone else. By playing basketball, it was always obvious, he said. After the tragic death of his mentor and getting kicked off the basketball team for stealing, he gave into a life where he felt he had control, even if it might not have been best for him. I went from being a basketball player to a troublemaker, and it felt like no one was interested in helping kids like us, KY said. Dater Bakery, 18, said he didn't understand the senseless nature of gun violence at Wedgwood Village until his older brother, Amadi Bakery, was fatally shot on December 29, 2018 at the complex. Before the incident, Dater said he always knew to stay away from certain people and beware of certain places in a neighborhood. He even grew accustomed to a tragic but all too familiar routine of visiting mourning family members of friends killed by gun violence. Yet the night his brother was killed, as he stayed home babysitting his 3 younger siblings, Dater said he realized this kind of violence is not something people should be used to. He was at a friend's house or something, and apparently someone came in the house with a gun, and they were like, "I need to shoot at someone. Who am I going to shoot at?" And he knew the other 2 people in that house, but he didn't know my brother, so he just shot him, Dater said of his brother's death. Experiencing such a personal, senseless loss shocked Dater away from engaging with street activity and turned his attention to services like MY Project USA, where he is now an active member. "I feel like I should stay away from everybody who associates with guns and stuff like that, because I really don't want it to happen to me." Even after he became a felon at the age of 18, KY said he still felt the desire to use the streets to make fast money for his family. What eventually turned him away was the 90 days he spent in solitary confinement in March 2020 during a 3.5-year prison sentence. "I realized I only ever did what I thought I was supposed to do to not be soft. Even when I saw my family rejecting my behavior, it was to a point where I didn't care," KY said. "My time in the hole gave me time to think about my life, and I just felt bad for how much pain I brought my mom." KY self-published a book detailing his experience in prison about a year and a half after his release in 2021. Now, he is a recognized advocate in his community for positive youth intervention and successfully re-entering the community after being released from prison. KY said he is concerned for youth who have easy access to guns but don't know the responsibility or stigma that comes with it. "I've seen some kids say they've never been in a fight, but they carry a gun everywhere they go," he said. "These are a lot of good kids, you just gotta have honest conversations with them. Kids need this kind of support," said Buell, founder of the Somali Bantu Diverse Center. "Not just adults yelling at them telling them what to do, but someone who is young, has seen life and can connect with them on a personal level to work against whatever they're experiencing at home,"